I can assure you this is much, much better than being against Michael Gove in the Salisbury countryside, where the Wi-Fi code in the Salisbury countryside where I was debating Michael Gove was Spitfire, but it didn't work. So there was no Wi-Fi at all, and I was stranded with him for 3 hours. But we had 800 people in a tent at the Chalk Valley Literary Festival, and at the end, after an hour of Michael Gove and my debating, we had a straw poll. Who is in favour of a people's vote on whether or not we should Brexit or stay in the European Union? A clear majority in favour of staying in. Now, can I start by doing the same thing? If we could, let's leave aside, because I'm on the home territory here. You know, Camden is I'm born and bred. My dad, his delivery round was here. He was, you know, my first memory of Belsize Park was my dad, who was a postman for 35 years in Camden, from the Hampstead sorting office on Hampstead High Street, which has now, I'm afraid, been sold for luxury housing, but then it was the sorting office. And my first memory of Camden was delivering polling cards for the February 1974 election and saying to my dad, because I was then just 10, saying, "What are we doing?" And he said, "For you, son, it's just pocket money." he said, and that was fine by me. I was going up and down these streets and Avenue Road and all that, and it was pocket money. But then it's become progressively more serious, and now it's the whole future of the country at stake. So it really, really matters. But can I say to you, none of this stuff about soft Brexit, Norway, Switzerland, all of that, if we could have a people's vote, because Theresa May is negotiating this treaty as we speak, if we could have a people's vote next year, take her treaty, whatever it is, whatever she gets, you know, Max Fac, customs partnership, whatever this new secret deal is, which we're told that she's negotiating at the moment, whatever it is, and put it against staying in the European Union, how many of you would be in favour of staying in? Well, that's why you've all given up the England match this evening. But it's also what I profoundly believe we can achieve. Because you see, the thing to understand about what happened 2 years ago is it was a referendum on the run. What happened was David Cameron, I mean, none of us asked him to do this referendum. He announced, because of internal Conservative Party difficulties, he was going to hold a referendum. He held a half negotiation with Chancellor Merkel. He then came back, announced a snap referendum. Most of us, can I be absolutely frank, maybe like many people here this evening, I didn't play much part in that referendum. I had for a moment considered we were going to vote to leave. I mean, we'd voted 2-1 to stay in 75. It was obviously mad for us to leave. So I simply assumed we were going to stay. And even though I didn't much like the look of his agreement, I thought he was playing fast and loose. I couldn't understand why we had this referendum, because it just appeared to be to propitiate the right wing of the Conservative Party. I assumed it was going to be fine. And to my huge shame, which is part of the reason why I'm exerting myself so much now, I did almost nothing in that referendum. The only thing I did was, at the last minute, I agreed to substitute for somebody who couldn't take part in a debate against John Redwood. You can imagine how keen I was to debate against John Redwood. But the reason I did it was they said it was a city debate. And they said, we've got to have somebody who can make all the arguments. So I said, well, OK, I'll go along and do it. And I found it utterly repulsive, because what I was faced with, which is what we face with all the time, were all these straightforwardly right-wing nationalist arguments, which are nothing whatever to do with the good of the people, to do with the good of us as a society, and all to do with some kind of shimmer of a kind of Thatcherite nirvana, where we declare UDI from the whole of Europe and our continent, and then we can do all kinds of wonderful things which are chimeral in terms of liberating our economy. And I remember saying to Redwood as I came out, I said, because John Redwood did my job. I was head of policy for Tony Blair and then was a minister under Gordon Brown. He was head of policy for Margaret Thatcher. And I said, it's very strange, John, I said as we came out, I said, what you're doing, you see yourself as doing, is completing the Thatcher thing, isn't it? Because Thatcher, she went berserk at the end. You know, 'cause it's important to understand the end of Thatcher. At the end of Thatcher, the reason why she was removed as Prime Minister is that she did two things. She introduced the poll tax. Can any of us remember the poll tax? The poll tax, which was my first academic book, because I was an academic before I became a journalist. The poll tax involved, in 1989, so we're now a generation ago, charging people in this borough, in the London borough of Camden, £400 a head for existing. It collapsed after 2 years where they tried to collect it. It couldn't be collected. There were riots and demonstrations and all of that. But the second thing she did, which was even more amazing, is she tried to resist the unification of Germany. Now, for most of us who had resisted, because I'm afraid an unreconstructed radical social democrat. I love democracy and I love society. That's what social democrats do. We love democracy and we love society. I didn't have much truck for communists. I've never regarded the suppression, Bertolt Brecht, if the people don't agree with you, you change the people. I've never had much truck with that idea of communism, where there were no elections and suppression and all that. But also, I've never had much truck with the idea of Thatcherism either. Neither of those two have appealed to me. What I thought had been spending all of these decades doing, including the time when I was a student in the early 80s and the mid 80s, was trying to defeat Soviet communism. That was authoritarian, dictatorial communism with no elections, no freedom, no markets at all, and to replace it with something like what we were doing, which was elections, markets, you have a debate about what you're going to do with your taxes and all of that. But what Thatcher said, remember when the Berlin Wall came down and Gorbachev did, which was the right thing, which was to allow these peoples of Eastern Europe to declare what they wanted to do for themselves, she opposed the unification of Germany, even though the peoples of Eastern Germany and Western Germany wanted it. Now, I thought that was slightly bizarre at the time, but more to the point, so did most of her ministers. They thought it was bizarre at the time too. So her cabinet revolted. There was the poll tax going on at the same time, and that's why she went. And let's be clear, what happened at the end of Thatcher? Now, the problem which we've got now, and this is what we're doing, which is the reason why we've all given up this evening and are not watching the England match or having Pims in the garden or doing whatever else you might do in this wonderful place, is because we're faced with an equally serious crisis at the moment, where what's actually happening, and it's a terrible crisis in our affairs, is that the people who we thought were not going to be able to carry on doing this in the 1980s and 90s, which was trying to force us into a kind of Thatcherite straitjacket where everything that goes on that's collectivist is bad, have returned. And what's returned, unfortunately, it's a really big problem that we face, is this concept of an interdependent Europe. Now, I think you all think, because you're all here, we're all the European movement and all that, we all think an interdependent Europe is just what we've spent our life struggling for. It's what we want. There have only been 70 years in the entire history of Europe, where we've been at peace. There have only been 70 years where no nation states of Europe have invaded and sought to violate the borders of another nation state. These are huge gains. The problem was that when the European Union gathered pace, and what it did, which is absolutely right, because what it's trying to do is to produce a union amongst the peoples of Europe, is that what Jacques Delors and the others who were constructing this realised is you cannot have a genuine union amongst the peoples of Europe unless there's some basic levels of equality. Not that everyone's the same, not that everyone has the same living standards, but we do something to see that there aren't just unconscionable differences of living standards and differences between the countries. And so what happened when the Berlin Wall came down, when communism fell, but they had living standards that were far, far below ours, is that what the European Commission did, and let's be clear, the European Commission, this is the club of democracies. This is not some invading army. This is all of the independent nation states of Europe who come together, who have members in the European Parliament, who have members in the Council of Ministers. What they decided to do, which is quite right, was to have some minimum standards, what Jacques Delors called social Europe, the working time directive, basic rights to holiday leave and things of that kind. And we were going to have an enlarged version of the regional fund, which had been hugely important for us, by the way, because when we joined the European Union in the 1970s, we had some of the poorest regions of Europe, which is why we benefited hugely. The Welsh valleys, the poorer areas of the north and Midlands of Europe, they benefited hugely from this. We still, at the moment, by the way, have some of the poorest areas of northern Europe, not Europe as a whole, because you've got Greece and southern Spain and Eastern Europe, but if you just take northern Europe, 7 of the 10 poorest regions of northern Europe at the moment are in England. 1 is in Wales, 1 is in Scotland, but the single richest area in the entirety of northern Europe is London, which tells you a huge amount why we're Brexiting and why we have this enormous set of social challenges. But What we decided in the 70s, because we're not just Northern Europe, we're now Eastern Europe, we're Southern Europe too, is that we would pull together. Not that we were going to have some kind of socialist nirvana where we have a single tax system, a single exchequer, all that, but we would actually do something to see that living standards were raised. But what happened with Margaret Thatcher, unfortunately, and the right, was they said that this was terrible, because it meant that our taxes, our relatively modest contributions actually to the European budget, weren't going here, they were going to help peoples in other countries, and this was bad. And that's what started this whole process of what became Euroscepticism, and then became Europhobia, and then became Brexit. Now, you can read all about it in this fantastic book called Saving Britain. And in particular, if you want to read the politics of it, it's all in chapter 2, which is entitled How Mr. Farage became leader of the Conservative Party, because what essentially happened was a Farageist reverse takeover of the Conservative Party. A nationalist right wing effectively took over. And the story is a fascinating story, because what effectively happened was that Margaret Thatcher, who is the two dominant prime ministers since 1945 of this country have been Margaret Thatcher and Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill was a very, very curious and hybrid figure. He started off as a liberal, became a conservative, thoroughly internationalist, was an imperialist who was a construct of his age, but always a thorough democrat who constantly and resolutely stood up against dictatorship. Margaret Thatcher, interestingly, because she was a woman, never participated in the war, and never saw, unlike most of her generation, what actually happened on Europe. She never travelled to Europe. So it's very interesting. It's all in the book. You can read all about it. She never travelled to Europe at all till her mid-20s, on her honeymoon when she went to Paris for the first time. And actually, if you want to understand these two sides of the English character, the constant engagement with Europe, including people who had to fight there, because we've had 2 wars in Europe in the last century, with those who've been more insular in their approach, then understanding Margaret Thatcher is important. So that's chapter 2. Chapter 1 is all about the economic problems that we face, and in particular this massive set of dislocations that we've suffered in the last 10 years, with large parts of the country becoming seriously poor. 10% decline in real living standards for the average worker since 2008 because of the crash, all of which, of course, then fed on this Euroscepticism, when the only question that people were asked in the referendum 2 years ago was, do you want to leave the European Union? Now, if you're asked a question and you're not feeling great about how things are going, London, as it happens, voted heavily in favour of staying. But in large parts of the country that feel distant and alienated from London, they were asked one question: do you want to leave the European Union? I mean, I've been travelling because I've been visiting all of the 100 constituencies that have the largest Leave votes, most of which are in the Midlands and the North. If you had asked the question in Gateshead, Birkenhead, Oldham, all of these places, do you want a fundamental reassessment of your relationship with Westminster, I can assure you, you would have got a colossal majority. You know, in Gateshead, where I was recently, the biggest issue that they raised, there's a big issue about immigration, and we need to discuss that openly, what we do as a nation about flows in and out of the country. But the biggest issue was the fact that in Gateshead, there's now a three weekly rubbish collection. Now, the reason why there's a 3 weekly rubbish collection is because of austerity since 2010 and massive cuts in local authority budgets. And the massive cuts in local authority budgets that mean that the bins are only collected once every 3 weeks also means that the class sizes have got larger, that it now takes 3 weeks to get an appointment at the GPs. All of these other things which people associate with things going badly in the country. What became very clear to me during doing a street stall in the shopping centre in Oldham is if we could get the bins collected once a week and hadn't had these big cuts in local authority budgets we've had in the last 7 or 8 years, we could probably have stayed in the European Union. And I can assure you that's a very good trade-off. I want the money to go to the front line, the local authorities, so that we don't blame everything as what's happened, unfortunately, in the last since the referendum and afterwards. Everything that's going wrong in the country is being blamed on foreigners, on Europe, on the European Union, even though it has nothing whatsoever to do with them. And that's all in here. Now, what's the position that we face at the moment? We had this very narrow referendum result 2 years ago. It was cake and eat it. We were promised, you know, remember the bus? 350 million for the health service every week if we voted leave. We were told that we could negotiate all these trade treaties with all these far-flung parts of the world where we didn't have trade agreements at the moment, which somehow meant that even if so just a slight bit of technical stuff. Trade halves as distant stubbles. The reason why we started the European Union as a common market, which is where it started as a common market, is because trade that is most lucrative is with your neighbours. We have more trade with Ireland than we have with China. Even though Ireland, of course, is a fraction of the size of China. Why? Because Ireland is right next door. And so obviously, it's the same as Camden trading with Westminster. I mean, Westminster may be Tory controlled and we may not like it, but we do a hell of a lot of trade across the border and we don't think anything of it. It's the same with England and Ireland. China is, and even though Liam Fox may not have noticed it, is quite a long way away. And therefore, the trade is much less. So all of the 27 other member states of the European Union with which we trade, they are all our 27 nearest countries. Where are they? They're Ireland, they're France, they're Germany, they're Italy, they're Belgium, they're the Netherlands, they're the Scandinavian countries. That's the reason why we have this common market. If you could sort of somehow tow us out into the mid-Atlantic, well, that's not much good because we're not near anyone then, but near some other set of countries, or make us the next, as I think Trump would love, the next state of the European Union, everything will be different, but it's not. And that's why we have the European Union as a trading arrangement, because the trade is so high. What we were told 2 years ago is that somehow there was some set of different trading arrangements which we could have, which might leave us better off. But that, of course, was a complete chimera. And the reason it's a complete chimera, 45% of our trade goes with the 27 other nation states of the European Union. 15% of our trade, which takes us up to 60%, goes with countries including Canada, South Korea and now Japan, with which the European Union has trading arrangements. So in order to stand still, this is before you get any additional trade at all, no advantages whatsoever. You have got to renegotiate all of that lot. You've got to have a standstill agreement with the European Union, all of your trading arrangements with them, and you've got to replicate your trading arrangements with the other 15%. And then you've got to get some kind of benefits beyond that with the others. All of the others, by the way, the European Union, which is a strong bloc of 500 million people and all that, is engaged in negotiations with. If you are just Britain, 500 million in the European Union, Britain there with 63 million, what chance do you think we've got with Trump? 63 million against the European Union with 500 million. And I can assure you there's nobody who respects power and numbers more than Trump. It's an obvious chimera, what's being proposed. And so what is it that, Liam Fox, who's accumulated more air miles in pursuit of less gain than anybody in the history of aviation, and apparently he's in the throes of trying to negotiate a trade agreement with Antarctica. The problem is he suddenly realised there's no one there. Because we're England, so we make jokes about this. I do head-to-heads with Fox. I do head-to-heads with our good friend Rees-Mogg, and with Farage. With Rees-Mogg, I have a very, very good head-to-head. This is how we go, because I spend longer with these people in studios than I would do with my family. I mean, it's a terrible fate that you have to face in order to fight this battle. The Rees-Mogg banter goes something like this, that when Macron, and we like Macron, by the way, is absolutely doing the right thing. He is standing out against both fascism to his east with what's going on with Putin, but also to Trump. Macron offered us to buy a tapestry, which apparently is going to go on display next year. I'm not exactly sure why we think the buy a tapestry is such a great thing to be celebrated, but it is the first time apparently it's going to leave Normandy since the 11th century. So because I have to do these head-to-heads with Rees-Mogg, I say that we have made a return gift. Her Majesty the Queen has made a return offer. Our return offer in return for the buy a tapestry is going to be Jacob Rees-Mogg. Jacob is going to be put on display in the Louvre for 3 months because he exemplifies everything that is best, maybe worst, but I don't say that to him, the best about British history in the last 4 centuries. The problem is that President Macron has said on mature consideration he's not prepared to accept Jacob because the buy a tapestry is considerably more recent than Jacob. So we're England and we go through all these things. But the truth of the matter is our trade will be wrecked if we Brexit on the basis that they're talking about at the moment. We'll be faced with we're all of a certain age, our children, in some cases, our grandchildren might be faced with visas and all kinds of other impediments to being able to travel and to work. None of them want that, which is the reason why, by the way, if we get a second referendum, we win it by miles, because I can assure you every under 40 in the country is going to be coming out and voting if there's a referendum on Europe next year, because they do not want to be, as one of them put it to me recently, shut up in a small island behind a border being governed by Boris Johnson, Jacob Rees-Mogg and Nigel Farage. I mean, that is not where they want to be at all. It doesn't matter whether they're left-wing or right-wing, that is not where they want to be at all. So there's a set of arguments about citizenship which are important too, but they're also, and this is what's coming out now increasingly, a set of arguments about security and safety. Because what people have sort of woken up to is that it's not a chance, it's not luck that we've had peace and freedom for 70 years. The reason why we've had it is that we have held together as democracies. We've been a club. The European Union, let's be clear, all this stuff, when I did this debate with Gove 2 days ago, he was going on about the European Union being a new empire. Well, I've never known an empire in history where people have so willingly signed up to it. You know, and he was going on about the Dutch golden age being the 17th century and all of these problems with Greece and Spain and all that. And I did just point out to him afterwards, the Dutch, they're a founder member of the European Union. They do not want to leave. The Greeks, and let's be clear, there have been phenomenal problems that Greece has had over the last 10 years. Maybe it wasn't the right thing for them to join this currency. I can't make a judgment for them. What I do know, because I meet Greek politicians all the time, none of them want to leave the European Union. None of them. Why? Because European citizenship and European solidarity and the freedom to travel is absolutely central to their identity as modern Greeks. I know this country well. I'm Cypriot. The reason I have this name Adonis is my dad came from Cyprus in the 1950s. And what was then, a terrible situation. And the Greeks then were under a military dictatorship. That's what was going on. The idea that Greeks, for all of whom this happened in their lifetime or in their parents' lifetime, would want to throw up Europe and throw themselves at the mercy of these kind of forces, that is not where they are at all. It's not where the Spanish are at. I had breakfast this morning with the Spanish ambassador. We were talking about things. There's a new government in Spain. They wish us well. They want us to stay in the European Union. They absolutely do not want to see the breakup of the European Union. No way. There's a big debate and there are big issues in Spain about what's going to happen to Catalonia and all that. What nobody wants is for Europe to break up. What they all want is to see a Europe which can continue to bring about goodwill, peace, stability and economic cooperation between the peoples of Europe, which is a tough and difficult thing to do. It's tough and difficult, obviously it is, because of the financial crisis that we had with the collapse of the banks 10 years ago and all of that. And the decision, it may have been the right decision, it may have been the wrong decision. I'm genuinely not sure to introduce the single currency. I don't know whether it was the right thing, but it's what was done. And it's very, very important to understand why it was done. Basically, the decision to set up the euro was a decision taken by Chancellor Kohl of Germany and President Mitterrand of France in order to deal with the unification of Germany and what was going to happen after the collapse of the Berlin Wall. And the big concern they had, which I completely understand because I lived through it, many of us lived through it, was once you have got Germany as the dominant power in Europe again, which is what happened with the unification of Germany, but a German new generation that the last thing they wanted was to revisit any of the horrors of the past, and you have a deeply, deeply worried France, which is what you had, and France had a good reason to be worried. There have been 2 wars which had literally destroyed their country. What Mitterrand and Kohl wanted to do was to have some massive act of union and solidarity between these 2 peoples to ensure it couldn't happen again. Now, I don't know. You can make arguments for and against whether the currency was the right thing, whether they should have created an army, whatever the right thing was. What you cannot do is constantly second guess and revisit these things. They decided the right thing to do was the currency. Most of the other countries in Europe came in, and the price of destroying that would be a massive, massive rupture across Europe. And what they're seeking to do is to defend it. What we should be doing is solidarity alongside them to see that we can. Now, where are we at the moment now? My view now, and by the way, until I did all this, I've never been a popular figure. The reason I went into the House of Lords was because I thought I was going to spend, because when I went to work for Tony Blair, can I let you into a secret? I'm a train spotter, what I wanted to do, he persuaded me to do education because it's important to have good schools, and I have a passion for education. I did that. But the deal I had with him is if I did my bit and tried to sort out schools, that he would enable me to play with the trains, which is what I wanted to do. And I always had this, what I always wanted to do is to electrify the railways. I've always had this idea that you could make the timetables better than they are at the moment. I mean, looking at Grayling, I mean, can you? And I had a great plan for the modernisation of the Northern Line, some of which has been done, because it's now been, you've got automatic train operation on Northern, I mean, it's transformed. Those of us who were here in Belsize Park and Hampstead and all that 30 years ago, remember what the trains were like then. You know, the arrival of a Northern Line train then was a bit like the Brontosaurus. I mean, they happened very rarely, and all of that's now improved. That's what I wanted to do. Now, it led me into a huge difficulty because one of the big things I wanted to do, because I have this very quaint view, which is what most of the rest of the world does. Maybe it's a good idea for England to do, you know, if it works successfully. Japan introduced high-speed trains linking their major cities for the Tokyo Olympics in 1964, linking Tokyo and Osaka, and it transformed Japan and has been a good part of the reason why they've been an economic powerhouse. France did the same 20 years later with the high-speed line from Paris to Lyon and then down to Marseille. Germany has done the same from Hamburg to Hanover, to Frankfurt, to Munich. So it's been a great success there. So I sort of thought it was a great idea. The big problem I had was Camden. The Camden New Journal which declared war on me because unfortunately the terminus of HS2 is Euston. I'm very happy to field questions on this after, but the big problem, as I discovered with building new railways and big infrastructure projects, is that everyone wants the stations and no one wants the lines. And what I desperately tried to do is to find a way of just having stations and no lines at all. But the trains, unfortunately, can't move by pure, the speed of light. They actually has to be a line. So that all proved quite problematic with Camden. I spent a lot of time wrestling with successive administrations in Camden to try and work out how we could get the benefits of bringing the high-speed line into Euston. And there will be, by the way, sorry, forgive me for moving from Europe to the parochial in Camden, but I know it's important to you and it's hugely important to this borough. Once we have completed the rebuilding of Euston Station and the renovation of all of the works that are part of HS2, including Crossrail 2, that will go north-south and will come from Hackney down to Islington into Camden with a single station covering Euston, King's Cross and St Pancras, and then down to Tottenham Court Road. This will transform Camden. It will be the best thing that's happened to Camden in a generation. It will be phenomenal, including the whole of Euston Station at the moment, which is a massive eyesore. It's a complete, terrible 1960s construct. We take it for granted because it's there, but the whole of the HS2 plan, if we can see it through, will put it underground. And that will be a mixture of parks, new social housing, and new retail and other buildings on the top. It will be phenomenal when it's happened. We've just got to constantly think big and think what we can do for the next generation. That's not to say that that is going to be accomplished without pains. It's all quite difficult, and all that happens and needs to be done. But that's what I wanted to do. I had no intention whatsoever of doing this Europe thing and taking on this great campaign. But the problem which we've got is that no one at the moment, which is the reason why you're all here this evening, is speaking up. What we were faced with was the people being practically voiceless, literally voiceless. We had a Conservative party which had been taken over by the far right, that Brexit means Brexit. And you know what the variant of Brexit means? Brexit means the Prime Minister yesterday. Brexit means Brexit really means Brexit. Have you sussed that? I mean, what does that mean? The answer is she hasn't the faintest clue, is the answer. And what she's trying to do is to try and get something which is some kind of compromise between the existing single market and the customs union and Rees-Mogg, who wants out of the whole lot. But you can't compromise that. You can't have a half no border. You can't have a half single market. This is the fundamental problem that she's up against. And you certainly can't have a half state of good relations and peace with our European allies. So she's faced with that problem. Unfortunately, on the left, let's be completely frank and open about this because many of us will be there at all. I love I love Jeremy. Let's be clear. I'm an Islingtonian. He and we have a shared passion for railways. He is an even greater train spotter, amazingly, than me. I didn't think there was anybody. But whereas I only buy the railway magazine at W.H. Smith's when I'm going on long train journeys, he actually subscribes. And when we meet, we literally, I'm not joking. We have discussions about railway timetables. So he's great on that side. But his bit of the left, which is, I'll be quite frank, isn't my bit of the left, regarded the European Union from the 70s and 80s as being a club of capitalists and all that, which I never saw at the time. My own view at the time was if you could get, this was fundamentally a political project, bringing the nation and the peoples of Europe working together. Obviously, it's in our interest that we trade together, because that is the thing that people do when they come together. They trade, they live, they work together, and all of that. I thought that was good. I thought it was very, very important we had minimum standards in this trading, which is what the social market is about and social Europe is about, and that's what Jacques Delors sought to do. And to be fair to Jeremy, he's been on a journey. He thought it was all a club of capitalists in the 70s. He's been on a journey ever since. But he wasn't quite there. Let's be frank. I mean, he only made one speech in the referendum campaign, and he didn't rally the left in the way he should have done. So there was a vacuum. But the problem is, we're facing a crisis. So there's no time for vacuums. We've got to speak up and do the right thing. And what is the right thing? Let me be clear to you what I think is the right thing, and then let's have a discussion afterwards. Not that Europe is perfect. Let's be frank, no political institutions are perfect. There are big things that can be done to improve it. We need more democracy in Europe. We need stronger social bonds in Europe. We need greater prosperity. We have a massive, massive set of issues to do with refugees and immigration. Let's be frank, we'd have those even if we weren't in the European Union. What's happening is a complete collapse at the moment of nation states in North Africa. That's what's happening at the moment. Massive poverty, a massive sense of desperation when it comes to the people. And they would come over anyway. The idea that they're coming over because there's the European Union doesn't understand where things are at all. Even if you had no European Union in Europe at all, you had just the independent states of Spain, Italy, Austria, France, Britain, they would still be coming over. The question is whether we're better off trying to find solutions to these issues collectively than individually. And obviously, we're better off trying to find them collectively. So we obviously have a Europe that can be improved, but nonetheless, allowing for the fact that we need to improve things, most of our trade is with Europe. Most of our political stability depends upon Europe. If there's any lesson from history at all, any lesson, it's that when we don't participate fully with our European friends and allies, worst of all, if we start declaring them to be enemies, the kind of language which David Davis and Liam Fox are starting to use about France and Germany, then that always ends in grief. That is the lesson of the last 500 years. We need to keep it together. We need to have an agenda for improving living standards, improving trade, and in particular, improving opportunities for young people, including the opportunities to travel, work, and engage across Europe. That should be the agenda. The worst possible agenda for us is to be pulling up the drawbridge, stopping trading with our European partners, imperiling our defence and security, because let's be clear, the countries that don't trade together don't do a great job of holding together when it comes to defence and security either. And we've got Putin over there with mass troops on the Baltic borders at the moment. This is serious stuff. You know, this is the guy who's already invaded the Crimea. And the reason why the Crimea was so vulnerable is that it's not in the European Union. There's no way he would have invaded the Crimea if it was in the European Union and a member of NATO, but he's been in there already. He's got these troops on the Baltic. I met last week the defence minister of Estonia. Estonia is a tiny country, but it's European. It has a European peoples. It's part of NATO, so it's subject to the Article 5 protection that any attack on any NATO country is attack on them all. And do you know what they're petrified of more than anything? They're absolutely petrified of Trump, because they don't know what will happen when Trump and Putin might be in the room together and how he might throw over all his alliances with the West. So what we've got to do is to hold together with these alliances, and then, without imperiling all these things which are the foundation of our prosperity and our security, what we should do is then set about the things that really do matter: a better health service, a better education system, opportunities for those kids, and it's a big, big problem in this country at the moment, and I say this as a former education minister, who don't go on to university. You know, where is our proper apprenticeship system? Where is the whole set of opportunities for the next generation? getting devolution for real in this country so that there's real empowerment by communities up and down the country, starting to heal this north-south divide, which is so serious in our country at the moment, dealing with all of these issues, but not, emphatically not, scapegoating foreigners, Europeans and the European Union for everything that's going wrong in this country, which if we do that, will set us back a generation. And then a final thing, because this is huge. This is the whole, future of our generation in the future. 2 years ago, when we had this referendum, it was all a bit clinical. I remember David Cameron, because as I say, I didn't play much part in the referendum campaign, but David Cameron used to talk about the European Union as, I remember vividly, this organisation, as if it was somehow kind of a golf club or all that. It somehow almost slightly distant from us. Maybe it's just in our interest to be a member, but it's not a fundamental part of our being. The reason why the European coal and steel community, which became the common market, which became the European community, which became the European Union, the reason why all these institutions were founded is because of the Second World War and the First World War, because there had been decimation across Europe. There had been rampant nationalism, there had been fascism, and there had been a whole generation that had been wiped out. And what the leaders, who I think were inspired then, including Churchill, including Attlee, including leaders here, thought was the right thing, was for us to come together, form joint institutions doing tasks together, including economic tasks that would bring us together, and that then there would be greater solidarity between us. And when people say that nobody thought that this is what was happening, that we were somehow sold a con, that this was all about a common market, it was nothing to do with wider political cooperation or that is a complete lie. The question on the ballot paper in the 1975 referendum was, do you wish to remain a member of the European community, brackets, the common market? This idea that it was somehow a lie was untrue. What people were told was that there were two sides to this. There were a set of straight economic relations, which are important, not having tariffs, not having economic borders and customs and all that, but also this was about a stronger act of solidarity. And if you go back and read, which I've done for writing this book, the original founding treaties of the European Union, they could not be clearer. The Treaty of Paris, which set up the European Coal and Steel Community, which is what became the Common Market and then the European Union, the first 2 pages of the Treaty of Paris have nothing whatsoever to say about coal and steel. This is what they say. Let me just read it to you, because this isn't a secret document which was somehow foisted on the British people without them realising. This is what we signed up to when we joined the European Union in 1973. The President of the Federal Republic of Germany, the Prince Royal of Belgium, the President of the French Republic, the President of the Italian Republic, the Grand Duchess of Luxembourg, the Queen of the Netherlands, and their plenipotentiaries. And this is how this treaty begins, which sets up the European Coal and Steel Community. Considering that world peace can be safeguarded only by creative efforts commensurate with the dangers that threaten it. Convinced that the contribution which an organised and vital Europe can make to civilization is indispensable to the maintenance of peaceful relations between our states. Resolved to substitute for age-old rivalries the merging of their essential interests to create, by establishing an economic community, the basis for a broader and deeper community amongst peoples long divided by bloody conflicts, and to lay the foundations for institutions which will give direction to a destiny henceforth shared, have decided to create a European coal and steel community. That's what it was about in 1951. That's what it's about when we joined the European community in the 1970s. That's what it's about today. And if we commit this massive act of national self-harm and leave this union of the peoples of Europe, which is a democratic union, over the next year, then we will have to learn in a bitter and hard way what we've lost. And what I think will happen is we'll end up trying to come back into it in 10 and 15 years' time, and we'll have wrecked a whole generation in learning the hard way the lessons which, thank goodness, we did learn in the decades after the Second World War, which is the reason why we've had peace and prosperity for these 7 decades. And we should not, at the behest of Jacob Rees-Mogg, Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson and their petty political opportunism, be throwing over as we are at the moment. Thank you very much.